You're watching Wild About Arizona, the official podcast of the Arizona Game and Fish Department. Here's your host, Michael Coliani.
Hello, and thank you for joining us, everyone. So the Arizona fall hunt season is in full swing, and that means thousands of hunters are out on our beautiful Arizona landscape participating in small and big game hunts. The Arizona Game and Fish Department receives no general tax fund dollars, so the majority of our funding to manage more than 800 native wildlife species comes from Arizona's hunters and anglers. The department dedicates a significant amount of resources to determining the correct number of animals that can be harvested during each hunting season, and that includes researching illnesses, such as chronic wasting disease that can have deadly consequences for some of our wild populations. To learn more about this research and how our hunters can be a part of it, we welcome Ann Justice Allen, an Arizona Game and Fish wildlife veterinarian, to the show. Thank you for joining us, Ann.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate you having me on the show.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this discussion for a while, so I'm really glad to have you. Ann, do you think first off you could just tell us a little bit about your journey to Arizona Game and Fish and what your current role is with the department?
Sure. Well, I've been with the Game and Fish Department for about 15 years. I was hired while I was finishing my master's degree at Utah State University looking at mastitis in dairy cattle, so you might think that's an unusual transition. I originally, before I was at Utah State University, I was a general practitioner working on dogs, cats, horses, cows, just in Arizona, in Utah and New Mexico and California. And it actually is a bit of a journey because my dad was a biologist. He taught at University of California, Irvine for many years, and so I grew up helping him with his research on small mammals, mostly pack rats and wood rats, and really enjoyed that work, but I didn't really want to be an academic working in a university setting, so that's why I became a veterinarian, because I really liked working with animals. When I graduated from veterinary school, there really wasn't any such thing as a wildlife veterinarian.
Sure.
So it wasn't until I'd been working for quite a number of years that I thought that this might be a possibility. So I went back to school, got the master's degree, and here I am.
And so that, like you said, that's something that's kind of morphed itself into that recently, where folks used to be able to they'd work with domesticated animals first and maybe move on to the wildlife, but now people can get a little bit more specific.
Right. When I first graduated from veterinary school, I think most wildlife management agencies were using cow and horse doctors in order to help them out with their wildlife management. And so that has dramatically changed. Now we have students that go into veterinary school with pre-veterinary degrees in wildlife management. In other words, they've done a lot of classes that have to do with wildlife management before they even get into veterinary school. And then while they're in veterinary school, they come and work with agencies such as ours. I have students that come through every few weeks, spend 4 weeks here learning how to be a wildlife veterinarian and what it's like to work with a wildlife management agency. Because we work with biologists that know a lot about ecology and populations and how those need to be managed. We don't give out medicines, we don't do surgeries, things like that. So it's a completely different skill set.
So, Ann, you really deal with a diverse range of issues that involve wildlife in our state. So what are some issues that you're really currently keeping a close eye on?
Well, tomorrow, my crew and I are going to go up to the Raymond Wildlife Area, and we are going to help with processing our bison herd up there. This herd was established several years ago from animals transported to Arizona from Wind Cave National Wildlife Refuge. So it's really interesting. This herd's doing very well. We're going to be giving them some vaccinations and dewormers and just generally giving them a health check and see how the herd is doing. They're a very interesting animal. They're very unique. They're very powerful. It's interesting how each species that I work with has its own kind of personality. Then later in the month, we are going to go down to southern Arizona, and we're going to do a black-tailed prairie dog translocation. We're taking those animals to Mexico to help Mexico reestablish their population there. And then lastly, we're going to work with our Yuma region and do some bighorn sheep translocations. And that's probably one of the things we keep track of most, because some of our populations of bighorn sheep have a bacteria that causes pneumonia, and others don't. And we need to make sure that those populations, when we're moving them around, match each other.
Sure.
So doing health population checks is very, very important for bighorn sheep.
So, I know you just kind of mentioned that each animal that you work with, has different behavior and all those sorts of things. Is there an animal in particular that really sticks out to you that you enjoy working with?
Well, the bighorn sheep are pretty special. They're very sturdy. They're very mellow. They're easy to work with. They're so iconic with their giant horns. And then pronghorn are pretty interesting too. We also work on the Sonora Pronghorn Recovery Program, and those guys are kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum. They are very excitable, very fragile.
Right.
And just very special, and they have such an interesting look about them with their big eyes and the way
they really
their things set on their horns set on their head. So
yeah, they look like they belong in the African savannah somewhere or something like that.
yeah, they do.
And they're also very fast, right? They're one of the fastest land animals in North America. And if we could kind of switch gears here and get onto the topic of rabies, because we get a lot of questions in the Public Affairs Department, about rabies, what folks should do if their dog comes into contact with a skunk or finds a bat on the ground or something like that. So what is it that you feel like folks out there should really know when it comes to taking care of their pets, rabies, those issues, and how they connect?
Well, the first thing is if your dog or cat comes in direct contact with a wild animal, and whether they're injured or not, you should probably go ahead and have that animal, the wild animal, tested for rabies if it's dead. If it's not dead, then you want to get your pet boosted for rabies as soon as possible. I think that's most critical. And regular rabies vaccinations are very important for pet health and even livestock. So horses, goats, cattle, if they're in certain areas of the state, especially southern Arizona, rabies vaccination is highly recommended on a regular basis. Even if your cat never goes outside, I would still recommend that they be vaccinated for rabies, because bats sometimes get in the house, and so that would constitute an exposure. The health department does rabies testing in situations like this where a pet is exposed for no charge, and all somebody has to do is contact either the health department or the Game and Fish Department, and we will see about getting that animal tested.
Okay. Just in your experience, is this something that's pretty rare, though, to see?
Rabies is not common in wildlife. Things that we need to look for that might suggest that an animal has rabies is abnormal behavior, especially a really aggressive behavior. Most of our wild species aren't likely to come up and attack a person or a cat or a dog.
Sure.
So animals with rabies tend to do that more frequently. And especially, like, for example, skunks. Skunks are very docile animals. They aren't likely to run up and bite somebody. So if a skunk runs up and bites you, obviously it's probably got rabies. And same thing with bats. Bats aren't likely to just run up, fly around and bite somebody. But if they have rabies, they might.
Right. Is there something that makes animals like skunks and bats a little bit more susceptible to getting rabies than others?
Actually, they're actually less susceptible, and that's what makes them more likely to carry rabies, because animals that are susceptible rabies die from rabies very quickly. And so they won't stay on the landscape very long, and they're less likely to expose people or pets.
Okay. Well, hey, let's get into the nitty-gritty of something that we discussed in our intro here, and that's another disease that affects wildlife, chronic wasting disease. It's a deadly neurological disorder. It affects animals like deer and elk. And while it's been detected in most western states, I understand that it hasn't made its way to Arizona just yet. So what's the significance of the disease and just keeping it out of our state?
The reason the disease is significant is because it's already caused the decline in several deer and elk populations in other states, in Wyoming, Colorado, areas where the prevalence of the disease is quite high. Some populations have 20 to 30% of the animals infected. And what this disease does and what it is it's a transmissible protein. It's in a very special class of disease organisms, not really organisms because it's a protein, but it's in a very special class of infectious agents. and like bovine spongiform encephalopathy, or BSE or mad cow, and another disease in sheep and goats called scrapie. And what these diseases do is once they get into the animal's body, the protein starts going up into the brain, and it converts the normal protein in the brain to an abnormal protein that doesn't break down. And this is what causes the disease symptoms and signs, which is basically the animals start behaving abnormally. They can't think, basically. So they eventually lose the will to live. They stop eating, they stop drinking. They just get a really dull look on their face and eventually die. And it's called chronic wasting disease because most of the animals in the end of the stage of the disease are very, very thin and emaciated. Now, it's not the only disease that causes thin, emaciated, abnormally behaving deer and elk, but it's the one that is going to be, if it comes into Arizona, have a significant impact on our deer and elk populations and also the way we manage those populations.
Sure. And I understand that the hunters out on the landscape right now can kind of be involved in helping us keep CWD out of our state. Tell us a little bit about how hunters can contribute to this.
So we can't obviously stop deer and elk from crossing state lines, but what we can do is keep from moving it across state lines ourselves. And as I mentioned, this protein is in the animal's tissues. It's in the brain. Those are the high-risk tissues, is the brain, spinal cord. So we ask that hunters, if they're hunting out of state, not bring those parts back unless it's needed for proof of legal possession. And then if they do bring those sorts of things back, then they need to be disposed of in a landfill. And we have rules regarding transport into Arizona of materials harvested from out of state, and hunters should take a look at those rules and be familiar with them to prevent that transmission. The other thing that hunters can do to help us out is help us with our surveillance. And this is really, really critical. In order to be able to do something, if this disease is introduced into the state, we need to detect it very early before it's at a high level of prevalence in the populations. Because if we can detect it early, we can manage it more easily. There's been some states that have been unfortunate and not detected it until they have hundreds of deer or elk infected. So we'd like to be able to find it when we only have a few deer or elk infected. And so in order to do that, we need to have tissues submitted from harvested deer and elk. And the easiest way to do that is to have the hunters help us do it. We really need their help. We can't do that job without their assistance. And there's a number of different ways that they can help us with that surveillance. They can collect the sample themselves. In fact, we just finished having a number of workshops demonstrating to hunters how to collect a CWD sample from their harvested animal. They can bring the head of their harvested animal to any of our regional offices during regular business hours. It's best to call ahead first to make sure somebody's available to collect that sample. We will have people at our meat processors collecting samples as animals are brought in to be processed. And many of our taxidermists throughout the state will collect samples from the animals that are brought in for the taxidermist process.
So if you really want to be a partner in conservation as a hunter, help us out.
Yes, exactly.
So I also understand that there's going to be, you're just speaking about kind of getting folks involved and how to, submit their samples and things like that. But there's also going to be a hunter education camp coming up this weekend. And so what are some of the folks in attendance going to learn there?
So there's a couple of hunter education camps. In fact, these camps are going on almost weekly for the next couple of 3 weeks in different regions. And you can find out about these hunter education camps on our website. And we will be there collecting samples from any animals that are brought in. And so that will make it easy for hunters to participate. They will find out a little bit more about chronic wasting disease. And these are just great opportunities to teach people more about deer and elk hunting. A lot of them are for kids. So there's special prizes for the kids. and drawings, and there's mentors to help people out in the field to kind of guide them to where they might be able to find a deer or elk and help them with, the whole process, really.
Sure.
And then, and especially with the elk camps, it's very useful in that they will have people there that will potentially help with skinning the elk and that sort of thing. And those, as I said, they're on our website. This weekend, I'm going to be in Unit 21. And my intern's going to be in one in the Prescott region.
Excellent, excellent. So, yeah, you can find out a lot more information about these camps at our website, azgfd.gov. And for some more specific information on CWD, you can visit azgfd.gov/healthy. Well, thank you so much for joining us, providing all this great information. Really appreciate it, Ann.
You're welcome, Michael. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for watching. Visit us online at www.azgfd.gov.